Neoliberalism is a demon dragging us all into hell, and its best defense is that it's kind of a boring demon that's hard to explain, so people don't really notice it. Just seems like that long slide into hell is a part of life. And it is confusing because neoliberalism can refer to a development model, a set of policies, an academic paradigm, or an ideology, and you're never really sure which one people are referring to. The term's been in use for over 100 years, and it went from being something that people would describe their own beliefs as to almost always being used negatively. Sorry, Global Emoji Twitter, I refuse to acknowledge that that isn't a bit. But the really wild thing is that neoliberalism is really just a set of ideas that some guys wrote down and then smash cut to a few years later, and it's the official policy of most of the world's governments. So let's get into it. Now, I want to be clear about my bias here. As you may have guessed from the part where I said that neoliberalism is a demon dragging us all into hell, I personally think that neoliberalism has some problems, namely being a demon who is dragging us into hell. But wait, I thought neo meant new and liberal just means freedom. So what's wrong with this new and improved freedom? Well, liberalism does refer to freedom, but not freedom of people, freedom of markets. So neoliberalism advocates that the free market will automatically construct an ideal society for everyone, and any attempt to control or regulate that market will eventually lead to an authoritarian state. As Canadian author Naomi Klein explains,
the three policy pillars of the neoliberal age are privatization of the public sphere, deregulation of the corporate sector, and the lowering of income and corporate taxes paid for with cuts to public spending.
Now, it's not actually important at all that Naomi is a Canadian, but I just wanted you guys to know that not every Canadian political commentator is a weird right-wing grifter, okay? Some of us are actually weird left-wing grifters. So there you go. Anyway, the central claim of neoliberalism is basically that the best way to construct a society is to let rich people do whatever they want. It's kind of a suspicious ideology, right? Like, if you took scuba diving lessons and your instructor was like, okay, if you encounter a shark, the safest, best thing to do is to right away jump into the shark's mouth. Take off your oxygen tank or anything else that the shark might hurt its teeth on while chewing. You know, you'd be like, what? Who came up with this safety protocol? And the instructor's like, oh, a shark. A shark wrote all this stuff for me. So who were the sharks that came up with neoliberalism? Well, the idea is credited to Friedrich Hayek and Ludwig von Mises, who grew up in Germany during the just kidding, I don't really care about those guys too much. Just know that they came up with the simple but also very bad idea that the problem with capitalism is that we still make rich people abide by some laws. Now, you might think that this idea would be pretty unpopular, and it really was and is. Although there is one group of people who has always loved it, which is rich people. And these rich people spent a lot of money trying to spread the ideas and practices of neoliberalism around the world. Did it work? Well, if you're neoliberal, what happened next is a real-life fairy tale. Now, once upon a time, there was a poor little market who was trapped and caged and regulated somewhat. She lived under the stairs. The market didn't like that. She dreamed of being free. She wished upon a star that someone would come and rescue her. Then one day, a handsome prince named Ronald Reagan brought the ideas of neoliberalism to America, and her fairy godmother, Margaret Thatcher, brought neoliberalism to the UK as well. Neoliberalism was like a party for rich people. The rich people didn't like how they weren't getting richer as fast as they possibly could. Over Reagan's presidency, he cut top marginal tax rates on the rich from 70% to 28%. Thatcher cut them from 83% to 40%. The market couldn't believe it. Then some mean, wicked labor unions came and tried fighting for workers' rights. That made the market sad again. Luckily, her new friends were furiously anti-union. Reagan famously firing 13,000 air traffic controllers who were on strike, and Thatcher shutting down the UK miners' strike. These actions gave private employers much more power to fire striking workers and permanently hire new ones, really throwing a wrench into the gears of the organized labor movement. Hooray, said the symbolic personified version of the market. Hold on, little market. We're not done yet. Thatcher and Reagan used tax cuts, crushing unions, deregulation, privatization, outsourcing, and bringing competition to public services to make that poor, sweet little old market as free and unregulated as it could ever dream of. Oh, that market was so happy to be free. But when it looked around the world, it saw something scary. There were so many other markets being held prisoner by left-wing governments. And so the little market said to Ronald Reagan, "Please, can we do something about that?" And Ronald Reagan replied, Oh, don't worry, little market. We've been toppling those governments for years, and we are not going to stop. So they sent their ideas around the world, and the market spread its wings, traveling far and wide to free the other little markets too. But then an ugly frog Democrat named Bill Clinton showed up, and he was part of a more left-wing government in the U.S. The market didn't like left-wing governments. They wanted to spread the money around, but the money wanted to stay together with the rich people like a big family. But Frog Clinton said, "Don't worry, little market. I may look like a frog, but if you kiss me, I will become a handsome neoliberal prince." So the market kissed Frog Clinton, and do you know what? It worked. He gave the market even more tax cuts and deregulation because he was a neoliberal too. And so was every president that came after him, Democrat or Republican. And they all lived neoliberally ever after. The end. Whew, did that bit go on too long? Never mind that. That's just a selection from my upcoming children's compilation, Bedtime Stories for Little Sociopaths. Please donate to my Kickstarter. Put the link right here. So the point I'm trying to make here is that if all you care about is markets and corporations and rich people, then yeah, neoliberalism has been a huge success with no downsides. But I did see in my YouTube analytics that I have a lot of subscribers who are not markets at all, but human people. So I guess we should, for you guys, get into a little bit about how neoliberalism affects the people of a country. And wow, there's a lot that we can blame on neoliberalism. I do not have time to give a whole exhaustive list, but here's a quick rundown of neoliberalism's greatest hits. Okay, so there's the 2007-2008 financial meltdown, the subsequent bailing out of Wall Street and the banks. There's the offshoring of wealth by the very rich to avoid paying taxes, the privatization of healthcare and schooling, the dramatic rise in child poverty, the destruction of the environment for profit, profits going up while wages stagnate, the rise of Donald Trump, as well as fascism's resurgence around the globe. There's the ever-widening gap between the rich and the poor. There's my high school girlfriend who dumped me over the phone on Valentine's Day, Ronald Reagan! Neoliberal ideas can also get into your head and change how you see the world. It's like the Matrix, except it's not cool, although it does have the word neo in it. For example, success in a neoliberal world is supposed to be based on merit. So poor people are poor because they deserve to be. They didn't work hard enough, or they didn't manage their money properly, or they just weren't efficient in the system. On the other hand, billionaires are benevolent geniuses rewarded for their hard work with unfathomable wealth. Elon Musk is cool and charismatic and likable, and he's like Iron Man, but real, and it was cool when he went on the Joe Rogan podcast and smoked that blunt, and he definitely really smoked it and really inhaled and didn't just pretend because he's a cool billionaire, and why would he be afraid to smoke weed? Do you see how neoliberalism poisons the mind? Now, the US will also force feed this economic poison to countries around the world any way they can. Sometimes that's through force, like when they invaded Iraq and then privatized everything. Sometimes they'll bribe countries into neoliberalism by giving them a loan through the World Bank or the World Trade Organization or the International Monetary Fund. And then as a condition to pay it back, they have to enact neoliberal policies. Sometimes it's through secret illegal CIA coups. They'll find a democratically elected government and topple that, replace it with a military dictatorship that's sympathetic to U.S. interests, and then they'll be the ones to put in the neoliberal reforms. Now, that last one might sound specific, but it's actually played out like that many, many times. So the textbook example of this is actually the first time neoliberalism was ever officially adopted as a government's policy, and it was in Chile under Pinochet. So Chile had elected an openly Marxist socialist president named Allende, who was trying to nationalize services, lift people out of poverty, and protect the working class. So obviously, a guy like that, the CIA had to get involved. So they backed a military coup, and on September 11th, 1973, Allende committed suicide, and his government was taken over by Pinochet. As a ruler, Pinochet executed somewhere between 1,200 and 3,200 people, imprisoned about 80,000 people, and tortured tens of thousands. He also undid a lot of Allende's progressive policies, privatizing healthcare, education, and pensions, and opening up the country to free trade. And I want to stress, this was before Thatcher and Reagan brought neoliberalism to the UK and the US, so Chile is really the testing ground for this terrible idea. Countries that go through these neoliberal changes often experience a phenomenon that the grossest people in the world call an economic miracle. In Chile's case, Pinochet successfully stabilized the economy, he raised the GDP, and he stopped inflation. So, I guess if that's enough for you to point at and say, it's a miracle, I guess you watch more boring Christmas movies than I do, but okay. There is a neoliberal economist and professor named Milton Friedman who had a huge impact on what happened in Chile and by extension what happens later to the entire world. So Milton Friedman worked with Pinochet directly, told him what economic changes he should enact. He also trained a bunch of Chilean economists at his school in Chicago about the concepts of neoliberalism, and a lot of these guys went on later to have very influential positions in the Chilean government and other governments around Latin America, and they came to be known as the Chicago Boys, which is too fun of a name for them, I think. Anyway, he coined a term for this period of Chile's history, which was the Chilean Miracle, the miracle of Chile, which seems like a weird name for a time in a country's history when the government is torturing its own people, but, that's what he went with.
Chile was a case in which a military regime headed by Pinochet was willing to switch the organization of the economy. And in that process, a group of people who had been trained at the University of Chicago, who had come to be called the Chicago Boys, played a major role in designing and implementing the economic reforms. The real miracle in Chile was not that those economic reforms worked so well. Chile is by all odds the best success story in Latin America today. The real miracle was that the military junta was willing to let them do it.
These lampreys of human suffering are reading the bedtime story about the wonderful, great tale of the success of the Chilean market, but they do not care at all about the Chilean people. Under Allende, the poverty rate in Chile was about 20%, and under Pinochet, that went up to 50%. The unemployment rate skyrocketed as a consequence of counterinflation. Okay, the rich got richer, the poor struggled to survive, more and more wealth was kept in the hands of fewer and fewer people. The effects of neoliberalism in Latin America and the global south generally look like an exaggerated, worse version of neoliberalism in the US. But that GDP rate, though, it went up so high. Oh, it's a true miracle. It's just like in the Bible when Jesus turned water into money and then also tortured thousands of people. Wow, it's a real miracle. Wow, I am a Christian. In conclusion, neoliberalism sucks and I hate it. It's everything that you don't like about capitalism turned up to 11. And I gotta tell you, I find neoliberalism as an ideology pretty unconvincing. Like the people who say that a free market is just going to be the best way to structure a society for everyone involved, I don't even believe them. Like obviously, I think they're wrong, but I also think that they know they're wrong because neoliberalism was never about helping society. It's a wealth extraction technique perpetrated on the very poor by the very rich, and it's one of the most successful scams of all time. Now, I really want to end this on a hopeful note, so let me mention this. After years of intense, sometimes violent protests, Chile actually forced its billionaire businessman president to let them vote to rewrite the old neoliberal Pinochet constitution. And they won with a 78% majority. So did they succeed? Were they able to completely vanquish neoliberalism from Chile? Well, this vote happened on October 20th, 2020, which was last Monday, so I don't know. But it's a very exciting development and something that we should all be watching closely. Solidarity with our brothers and sisters in Chile. And also, let's keep a wish and a prayer in our hearts for everyone at the CIA who had to hear about this and the Bolivian elections within the space of a week. Gotta be tough. Anyway, as this graffiti says, El neoliberalismo nace y muere en Chile.